Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Denise and I talk about fascinating cases. Cases that have fascinated me my entire life, or at least since I first heard of them. Recently I dropped a video all about Jonestown. The Reverend Jim Jones took his People's Temple to Guyana, South America, where he created Jonestown, a town named after himself. He said it was going to be a utopia, and really what it was starvation, hard labor, little sleep, and no escape in a thick jungle. On November 18th, 1978, 900 people died by cyanide poisoning in Jonestown, and that includes 300 children. Congressman Leo Ryan from California, along with some journalists and concerned relatives of those living in Jonestown, decided that they were going to take a trip there and check out all these rumors to see what the conditions really were in Jonestown. And Jim Jones didn't like this at all. And after the visit, he had his gunmen go follow Leo Ryan and his group to the airstrip where he was gunned down. 5 people died on the airstrip. We have a lot of survivors to talk about, though, and that's what got me thinking. Let's talk about those who survived Jonestown, how they did it, why they did it, and where they are now. Let's start with Leslie Wagner Wilson. Leslie was in her early 20s when she joined the People's Temple in the 1970s. Her and her family liked the message that Jim Jones was spreading. It was all about community living, socialism, and blacks and whites worshiping side by side. While with the People's Temple, Leslie met a man named Joe Wilson, and he was very close to Jim Jones. They married, and they had a son named Jakari. They believed in Jim Jones's message so much that Leslie and Joe decided to move their family to Jonestown, Guyana. But it didn't take long for Leslie to see the light, and it wasn't coming from Jim Jones. She said the conditions at Jonestown were awful. People were basically starving. They were working for long hours in the hot sun, and they had very little sleep and very poor showering conditions, and she said she just wanted to get out right away. But she couldn't talk to her husband. He was head of security for Jim Jones. And anyone who snitched on anyone or anyone who talked poorly about Jonestown or the People's Temple, they would get snitched on and brought up before the congregation and punished. And Leslie knew that she could not talk to her husband. But she did find some like-minded people who also wanted to get out of Jonestown. And they thought the perfect day to do it would be when Congressman Leo Ryan, journalists and concerned relatives were going to be visiting because the security team would be preoccupied with the big show and the visitors that were coming. So on the morning that Leo Ryan was going to be visiting, 11 people started walking into the jungle. Leslie had her son strapped to her back, and they found railroad tracks leading to Matthews Ridge. That was their destination, and it was 20 miles through the jungle, but they made it. And today, Leslie is an inspirational speaker, and she did write a book about Jonestown that I read, and it was very good. She had this to say about Jonestown.
The compound that day, again, there was a little bit of panic. You could see it, especially in the leadership. Those in leadership, you knew something was wrong. Jim did not want Congressman Ryan to be in Jonestown. He did not want the visitors. He doesn't want anyone leaving because he is frightful that everything will be exposed.
During his visit, Congressman Leo Ryan and the journalists saw what was going on in Jonestown, and so far everything looked good. They were putting on a big show for the visitors. The food was much better when the congressman visited. But on that same night, someone slipped a journalist a note. It was Vern Gosney and Monica Bagby, and it said, "Please help us get out of Jonestown." And Jackie Spear, Leo Ryan's assistant, said that's when she realized some of these rumors were true. There were people who could not just leave Jonestown on their own. They were being held there against their will. So Leo Ryan made an announcement and said, anybody who wants to leave Jonestown can leave with me. We'll order a new plane, another plane, and we'll get anybody out of here that wants to leave. And the Bogue family and the Parks family, who had been with Jim Jones for years and years, decided they wanted out of Jonestown. So Leo Ryan said, we're going to get on the truck and we're going to go and you can leave. And it ended up being only about 20 people, but it was enough to flip Jim Jones out. He thought these people were going to go and talk bad about People's Temple and spread false rumors back in the States. And he always thought people were coming for him and his followers. That's what he always threatened to them. So what happened was Congressman Leo Ryan and his group went to the airstrip, and Jim Jones had them followed by men with guns who ended up shooting everyone down. 5 people died, including Leo Ryan on that day. Many people from the Parks family survived, and the Bogue family. Patricia Parks was killed. Jackie Spear was severely injured. She almost lost an arm and a leg, and she spent so much time in the hospital to heal, but she's also a survivor.
It took me a while. I did have counseling for almost a year. But I also looked at it as a gift because I survived. I got a second chance to live.
Vern Gosney and Monica Bagby were in a small plane with a man named Larry Layton. And Larry Layton was a big supporter of Jim Jones, but he pretended to be a defector, and he brought a gun into that small plane and started shooting. He killed the pilot, and he shot Vern Gosney 3 times in the stomach. Vern Gosney did survive that shooting, though. He and Monica remained friends when they got back to the States. Monica died kind of young, and Vern Gosney always said he had one big regret about Jonestown, and that was the fact that he left his son there with Jim Jones, and his son ended up dying from cyanide poisoning.
I think at the moment when I knew that my son was dead and being asked to describe his clothing, I think my mind just snapped. I just think I just had a mental breakdown. I didn't function really well for a very long time.
Vern became a police officer, and he did recently die. Larry Layton, on the other hand, is the only person ever charged and convicted of a crime that had something to do with Jonestown. He ended up spending 18 years in prison, and then he was released. But he actually had support from some of the survivors who said he was absolutely brainwashed by Jim Jones and not in control of any of his actions. So now we have to talk about some other survivors. We've got 4 people that actually survived the actual day of the poisonings. And these are Hyacinth Thrash. She was an old woman who was there in Jonestown with her sister. She had heard the announcement from Jim Jones to come to the pavilion. Everybody had to come to the pavilion, and it sounded kind of foreboding. Her sister said, "Let's go," and Hyacinth said, "No, I'm not going." And she hid under her bed until it was all over. Her sister ended up dying, and Hyacinth walked out to see all the bodies surrounding the pavilion. She survived and ended up writing a book, and it was called The Onliest One Alive. Then we have Stanley Clayton. Stanley Clayton was with the People's Temple for a while, and he also survived by going to the kitchen and helping them create the Flavor Aid and cyanide mixture. He then said he needed to go and say goodbye to some friends. He slipped past the guards and he hid in the jungle until it was all over.
I never did want to believe it, that this was going to take place. It was just something that, after I seen that it was coming through, that it was going through, only thing I was trying to do was trying to figure a way out of it.
We also have Odell Rhodes, who was with the People's Temple for maybe 2 years. And here's how he managed to avoid taking the cyanide. Some nurse asked for a stethoscope, and he said that he would go get it. She wanted it because she was going to probably go check to see if how long it took for people to be dead. So he said he was going to go get that. So he walked past the guards, who did say, "Where are you going?" And he said he was on a mission. And then when he got to some of the Jonestown buildings, he hid until it was all over.
I never believed wholly in very much of anything, and I couldn't buy a lot of the things that he said. I couldn't buy, that's just never been my thing, killing myself. I don't figure that's a way to solve anything.
And then we have Grover Davis, who was 79 during his time at Jonestown. He was hard of hearing, and he didn't hear the announcement that said, "Everybody get to the pavilion." So he didn't go right away, and when he did mosey over there and see what was going on, he hid in a ditch, and he was a survivor. Then we have Tim and Mike Carter and Mike Prokes. Tim Carter was a very high-ranking member in Jonestown. He would do anything Jim Jones had to say, and he was loving the whole idea of what Jonestown was and what Jim Jones promised, but that's probably because he had privileges. So when everyone was taking the cyanide poisoning, Jim Jones told Tim and Mike Carter and Mike Prokes to take these suitcases filled with $1.6 million and some papers from Jonestown and a gun, and take it to Georgetown, Guyana, and give it to the Soviet embassy. And if they were caught or stopped, they were to take that gun and they were to put it to their own heads. They heard what was going on in Jonestown, and Tim Carter actually went back just in time to see his wife and his son dying from cyanide poisoning.
I leaned over and I started crying and I said, "I love you so much. I love you. I love you." And she started going into convulsions. I wasn't. All I was thinking about at that point was, I had nothing else to live for. My son was dead and my wife was dying. And I had a way out of Jonestown, and I took it. Why I was picked, I don't know.
The three men were actually captured eventually by Guyanese officials, and they were returned to the United States, where Tim Carter would go on to take part in a lot of reunions from Jonestown and a lot of documentaries about Jonestown. Mike Prokes, on the other hand, remained a loyal supporter of Jim Jones, and he ended up taking his own life not too long after the cyanide poisoning killings. Stephen Jones was Marcelin and Jim Jones' only biological child, and he was on the Jonestown basketball team, along with his adopted brother, Jim Jones Jr., and they were in Georgetown for a tournament along with other members of the team. And on the day of the killings, they got a message from Jonestown that said, "It's time. It's happening. The team needs to take their own lives." And they decided they weren't going to do that.
My father was on the radio, and he said, "Jimmy, we're visiting Mr. Frazier," which was a code. Then he said, "The Avenging Angels have visited Leo Ryan, and we need you to avenge our actions." In code, break that up, was, "We're going to commit to revolutionary suicide. The congressman has been killed. We need you to avenge our deaths, so kill anybody in town and kill yourself."
And Stephen Jones was haunted for years because he always thought about the fact that had the team been in Jonestown, him specifically is the only person that could have stood up to Jim Jones. Could they have stopped the killings? They grappled with that for years, along with all the loss of the people that they loved, family and friends that they lost in Jonestown. Stephen Jones lost his mother, Marcelin, as well.
I long ago stopped blaming my father, and I hated him when he was alive and for years afterward. But I've said before, I did my time in hell on earth, and a lot of tremendous grief, remorse, shame, all of that for years.
He said he got his life back on track finally when his baby daughter was born, and he was able to cope with everything that he had been through. Stephen and Jim Jones Jr., they each have families, and they're living somewhat peacefully as they can after dealing with the events that happened in Jonestown in 1978. They both will go on to speak in a lot of documentaries and shows and movies and books about Jonestown. They have a lot to say, and it's interesting whenever I come across an interview, especially by Stephen Jones. There was a lot of other people that survived Jonestown that day. Either they were in Georgetown or they were back in San Francisco. I can tell you this much after listening to some interviews about the case. They don't appreciate the Kool-Aid jokes. They were dealing with fear, anxiety, and grief for years after losing the people in Jonestown, their loved ones and family members, and they survived either by the choices they made to not participate or they happened to be not in that place at that time when it was happening. The survivors we talked about today were the ones that lived and the ones that were able to tell their story for years to come. They survived Jim Jones' revolutionary suicide is what he called it, but it wasn't that at all. It was absolute murder. What are your thoughts on this video? Let me know. Comment and I'll get back to you. I'll be dropping more, and I appreciate you watching so much. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you again soon.